As I returned from my 10-year foreign job, the new staff mocked me since I was a middle-aged rookie. "Well, I'm not a part-timer," I said, surprised by his unexpected statement. He continued to make fun of me despite my attempts to correct him. "Are you serious?" A coworker I hadn't seen in 10 years stepped in at that moment, but the new hire's attitude remained unchanged. This type of mockery persisted until I made the decision to speak up one day. "Since you claim to be an elite in the sales department, I thought you could handle this with ease." "What did you say?" Karma struck the new hire hard the instant he gave in to my pressure and stopped smiling. Charles Johnson is my name. I work as a 54-year-old employee for a tech firm that specializes in entertainment and mainly offers online streaming services for movies, TV series, and anime. 10 years ago, I was transferred to an overseas branch after having previously worked in the company's headquarters in the sales planning department. Because of my respectable performance history at headquarters, I was selected as a backup to assume a leadership position when the overseas branch was experiencing subpar performance at the time, particularly from the new hires. The relocation to the overseas branch occurred right before my daughter's high school graduation and their upcoming enrollment in animation college. I have a wife and 2 daughters. My children had already made the decision to leave home and live in dorms at that point, so they could concentrate entirely on their studies at the animation college. They put a lot of effort into getting into that school because they were Anime fans and shared my desire to work in the field. When I asked my wife to accompany me, she grinned and readily accepted, as she had always dreamed of living overseas. My wife and I relocated overseas to where my new office was located, so we didn't worry too much, even though it was sad to be apart from our girls. To claim that everything went without a hitch abroad would be an understatement. Employee morale was generally low, and the branch was functioning poorly, perhaps as a result of their inability to adapt to life in a foreign nation. I was the pinch hitter sent from headquarters, and at first the staff didn't want to talk to me in such depressing environment. They viewed me as an unwanted visitor. However, because I had been moved here, I couldn't simply go back and do nothing. I made it a point to hear the employees out and help them reach their full potential. They eventually opened up to me as I worked slowly with them, and we began to develop a relationship of trust. We were able to successfully push the reset button and spin the branch around as a result. In recognition of these accomplishments, I was restored at headquarters and permitted to return to the United States with my spouse. My girls received their college degrees and secured employment while I was deployed abroad. I was excited to see my coworkers again, who had worked with me at the same headquarters office, and I was thrilled to find them waiting for me when I got back. "Charles, 10 years have passed. How are you?" "Oh, Tom, it was tough with everything going on, but I managed to get through it." My comrade in arms is Tom Wilson, who has been my coworker and greatest buddy since we began working for this corporation. In addition to having families and being middle-aged, we have a lot in common. We linked right away, and we continued to support one another even while I was abroad. My wife and I were relieved and happy to be reunited with Tom, our other coworkers, and my daughters, who had completed college and begun working. I made a commitment to live a meaningful life with my family and friends for the next 6 years till I retire now that I'm back in my hometown. I was ready to start working with that resolution when a man showed up, clouding my resolve. "Happy morning. Man, yesterday was exactly what I expected, and I nailed it." For the first time in a decade, I was at my desk at headquarters when a much younger male employee walked in and burst out laughing. Today, I might also land another big one. I'm fantastic. We will be really busy. To be honest, it's a little excessive. Several of my coworkers, including Tom, grimaced in frustration as he boldly entered the office while continuing his self-praise. "Look who it is. James is here. Will he truly act like way today again? I hope someone brings him back to reality." The mere sound of his laugh deters anyone from working. I was uneasy while my coworkers and subordinates whispered to each other. Then, with a sarcastic smile, the young worker immediately caught sight of me and dared to say, "Well, who could you be?" A middle-aged temporary newbie, particularly for a first meeting and asking someone a question. His remarks were way too impolite and careless. Even though I was becoming angry, I couldn't help but think it was humorous. I was so intrigued by the ridiculous notion of a middle-aged temp that I nearly wanted to meet one. However, I controlled my annoyance and laughter, remaining calm as I gave this really impolite man in front of me a small nod. "I'm not a temp." "What? Are you serious?" Tom, who had been observing the event, got up in surprise and rushed up to us just as I was about to nod back. "What's happening, Tom? With that solemn expression, why are you hurrying over?" "I'm afraid of you. Avoid making jokes. Why in the world did you refer to this man as a temporary newbie?" Tom intervened to keep me safe and reprimanded the man he named James. "This is Charles, a peer and coworker of mine. He is neither a novice nor a temp. He spent 10 years in an overseas office where he made things better, but you probably don't know because you just started." James gave a contemptuous response, as though he didn't care, to Tom's frantic explanation on my behalf. All right. So he's simply another old man with experience. You don't need to recall that the name is James Anderson. Hey, what's with that attitude? Wait a minute, James. I won't wait. I'll see you around. I have business to do. James picked his nose in boredom as he made his way to his desk, ignoring Tom's attempt to stop him. Tom turned to face me as I stood there in disbelief at James' contemptuous actions and uttered the following. "Sorry for putting you in a bad mood right after you got back. James, he's got the skills and the drive, but his personality, well, he's a bit of a troublemaker." "What do you mean by that?" When I asked, Tom looked over at James with an uneasy expression and began to explain. James joined the company just 3 years ago, coming from a prestigious high school and university. He has the talent to match his impressive background and performs at a high level. Being in his early 30s, he's energetic and, in terms of company resources, an excellent asset. However, his overconfidence in his abilities has led to increasingly arrogant behavior. He regularly shows up late, and when Tom or other senior colleagues reprimand him, he just lets it go in one ear and out the other. He only does the minimum amount of work assigned to him, never staying late to handle additional tasks, using the clock as an excuse to leave on time. If he finds a female colleague attractive, he persistently asks them out for drinks or dinner, practically forcing them into dates. Tom and the others are fed up with James's reckless behavior and have taken their complaints to upper management several times, asking them to rein him in. However, upper management values James's strong performance and abilities, so no matter how much Tom and the others complain, they keep giving vague responses and avoid taking any real action. This vicious cycle has continued for the entire 3 years since James joined the company. Recently, James has started resorting to even more underhanded tactics. "Hey James, get to the conference room now." "What? What's that?" "Just come with me. Today, I'm finally going to get through to you." One day, fed up with James's arrogant behavior and lack of remorse, Tom finally lost his patience. He called James into the conference room, determined to give him a serious talking to. But before he could start, James pulled out a voice recorder like a trump card. "I'm going to record this conversation. If it crosses the line, it'll be your problem." "What? What do you think you're doing?" "Oh, and as I've mentioned several times before, the head of HR is my aunt. If you keep messing with me, she won't stay quiet." James's words left Tom at a loss for how to respond. It turns out James's aunt is the head of HR at this company, and she played a significant role in getting him hired. She dotes on James, and with her title as HR director, wields considerable influence. James's daily misdeeds were effectively being swept under the rug by her. With his aunt backing him, James's attitude grew worse by the day. Every time Tom and the others tried to criticize or caution him, he threatened them with, "I'll report this to my aunt as harassment. Depending on the situation, I might just tell HR that you're harassing me. It'd be interesting to see what happens to you and the others, don't you think?" "What did you say? Harassment this, harassment that. It's like a broken record. Don't you realize that preventing us from giving you rightful feedback is illegal? If that's allowed, this company won't survive." "Of course, I don't know anything about that. Feel free to say whatever you want. It won't change the way I do things. Enough is enough. You're dead wrong if you think everything's going to go your way." Tom was genuinely furious, but James flaunting his aunt's influence left Tom helpless in the end. Anyway, James is highly skilled as an employee, but he's a major headache, constantly showing off his aunt's connections. Be careful around him. Got it? Seriously, a lot has changed while I was away. As I acknowledged Tom's warning, I noticed him glancing back and forth between James, who was smirking as he worked, and the other employees who looked just as uncomfortable as Tom did. He let out a big sigh. While I was busy trying to turn things around at the overseas branch, the situation at headquarters had become a real mess. Although James's behavior initially shocked me, I wasn't intimidated by his threats. After all, I have the experience and achievements I've built over the years at this company, including my decade overseas. For my own sake, and for colleagues like Tom, I'll need to figure out when to use my leverage. Just as I was considering this, James turned his attention to me. "Hey Charles, could you get me some coffee? I'll take it with 5 sugars and some milk, thanks." One day, while I was working, James casually came up behind me and made a blunt request. "I'm busy right now, so could you make it yourself? Coffee is self-serve, and I'm sure you know how to brew it. Come on, don't be so uptight. I'm an elite in the sales department, you know. You should be serving me." As I politely tried to refuse, James pointed at me, laughing just like he did the first day we met. "Like you could be busy. You're just a worn-out, middle-aged newbie temp." It was the same misguided, presumptuous line I'd heard before. I couldn't believe how this guy had the nerve to label me as a new temp. Who does he think he is, giving orders to a senior colleague in the same department? Complaining, or even thinking about it, felt like a waste of time. So to avoid wasting energy, I decided to just bring him the coffee with sugar and milk as he asked. However, after taking one sip, James responded, "This tastes awful. Did you even put 5 sugars in it? Are all middle-aged guys hard of hearing? I followed your order exactly. If it still tastes wrong, either there's something off with your taste buds, or you're just saying that to mess with me." James didn't even say a simple thank you. Instead, he just kept smirking and complaining. Another day, James started bothering me in a particularly nasty way. "By the way, how old are you, Charles? Must be tough being treated like a newbie even in your late 40s. Hey, don't ignore me." When I ignored him, he kept pestering me persistently. As I silently observed him while working, it became clear that James was simply enjoying having someone in the department he could freely look down on. But there's no need to play along with this petty bully's nonsense or cater to his whims. I just focused on doing my own job. I kept reminding myself of that, and even though James kept trying to engage with me every time we crossed paths, I continued to observe him while calmly getting my work done. However, even after 2 months, James's attitude hadn't changed, likely because I was letting him be. "Hey Charles, what's with this document? I can't make heads or tails of it." One day, as usual, James started bothering me. He was holding a document I had just prepared for him and tossed it in my direction. "What is it this time?" "I told you, didn't I? I needed a document I could use for sales, and I made it as clear as I could based on your request. What's not so clear about this? It's filled with technical jargon and looks like something out of a sci-fi action movie with all these numbers." James, as usual, mocked me with his loud laughter while hurling insults, despite my polite response. So I decided to provoke him a little. "I'm sorry. I thought that as someone who calls himself an elite in the sales department, you'd find this level of understanding a piece of cake. What did you just say?" Seeing James clearly irritated, I calmly continued. "Actually, you were just complaining about technical jargon, but I made an effort to simplify it for you. In simpler terms, I used only the most basic terminology." "What did you say? Listen here, you middle-aged temp. Who do you think you are, talking back to me like that? What could you possibly understand?" James dropped his mask of false politeness and revealed his true nature, lashing out at me. I had seen more than enough of this guy, so I was about to shift my focus back to my actual work when it happened. "Hey James, I've been listening to you, and I can't take it anymore. Tom slammed his desk and stood up, clearly at the end of his rope. As if Tom's action was a signal, our other colleagues and subordinates also stood up, all advancing toward James. But James, still not grasping why they looked so angry, fed surprise and said, "What's the matter with you, Tom? And the rest of you too? Why the scary faces?" I was just trying to set this middle-aged temp straight because he's useless and has a smart mouth. James's utterly condescending words angered not just Tom, but several of our colleagues and subordinates as well. Yet James continued to insult me with his usual smug grin. Being a newbie in your late 40s is already something, but a useless old geezer? That's just sad. What? Hey, I meant to ask you 10 months ago, but are you serious right now? As James kept hurling condescending remarks at me, every single one of my colleagues and subordinates fired back at him with righteous anger. Charles isn't a part-timer, and he's not a newbie either. And for the record, he's not a useless old man. He's been working here for 30 years, the same as us. You keep calling Charles a newbie temp every chance you get. But where did you get that idea? Explain your reasoning in 20 words or less. What? Wait, James was stunned, completely bewildered by the fierce backlash from my colleagues. Tom then added to the pressure, looking at him with a mix of disbelief and disappointment. Are you telling me that you've been serious about all those things you've said? You've been working here and still don't know who Charles is. What the hell? You're all talking nonsense. How would I know about some old guy with nothing going for him except a youthful face? James tried to double down, but his words were weak, lacking the confidence they once had. Without me having to say a word, it seemed James was finally starting to realize just how badly he had misunderstood everything. So desperate to assert his dominance, he failed to see how wrong and mistaken he truly was. But by the time James started to understand, it was already too late. I stopped Tom and the others from pressing further and decided to speak directly to James. Tom introduced me on my behalf 2 months ago, but I doubt you remember. You even said it yourself that you didn't care and that I could be forgotten. With that, I decided to play the trump card I had been holding on to. So let me introduce myself properly. Nice to meet you, James Anderson. I'm Charles Johnson. My title here is a sales planning department employee, but that's just my public role. After this introduction, I handed James a business card. Due to my achievements overseas 10 years ago, I acquired the other role mentioned on this card. Yes, Director of Legal Affairs. Legal Affairs? James was stunned as he read the title on the card, which represented the position the company president had awarded me based on my successes at the overseas branch. The Legal Affairs Department handles all legal matters within the company, from contract reviews to internal disputes and legal consultations to litigation management. Because of my background in studying law, handling detailed tasks with care, and having strong crisis management skills in communication and resolving issues, I was able to successfully lead the overseas branch. Upon returning to headquarters, I was promoted to Director of Legal Affairs. As I explained this to James, his face went blank, and he started moving his mouth like a fish out of water. This has to be a joke. You're the Director of Legal Affairs. That's like being the ultimate veteran. Well, I just did what I felt was necessary, I replied. And to be honest, I'd never imagined my first task as the Director of Legal Affairs would involve something like this. My first task? What do you mean by that? Seeing James's confusion, I decided to play my next card. It means dealing with you, James. What? Me? Hey, what are you talking about? Naturally, James couldn't accept this and angrily confronted me again. We've received numerous complaints about you, not just from the sales planning department, but from various departments. And it seems you've had your aunt, the HR director, cover them up for you, haven't you? Because of her, the complaints never made it up the chain, and gathering evidence was difficult. That's why, along with my new role as Director of Legal Affairs, my first task was to handle this matter. At this point, I presented all the evidence I had gathered over the past 2 months, as well as proof of James's misconduct and abuse since returning to headquarters. This included evidence that his aunt, the HR director, had indeed been covering up complaints about him and embezzling company funds to give him extra spending money. This alone made James's face turn pale, but I had something even more damning. I also did a little digging into your resume. Turns out you didn't actually graduate from a prestigious school or university, did you? In fact, you only graduated high school and were working at a host club. What? You even found that out. James's face grew even paler, and Tom and the others were left speechless in shock. But I wasn't finished. And after working at the host club for a while, your doting aunt pulled some strings to get you into this company. Furthermore, because you were a regular at your previous job, your aunt used her influence to involve 2 female HR staff members, allowing you to fake your credentials and get hired as a full-time employee. No, wait, that's... James's face turned even paler, and his shoulders and knees began to tremble violently. It turns out that this arrangement continued up until now. Yesterday, the 2 HR staff members admitted everything during questioning, revealing your aunt's involvement in the fraud. No way, this can't be real. This conduct was deemed a serious violation of corporate compliance. As a result, appropriate disciplinary actions have been decided, not just for you and your aunt, but also for the 2 HR staff members. This is unreal. Exposed for his aunt's corruption, James collapsed to his knees, devastated. But after enduring his disrespectful attitude for 2 months, I wasn't done. I had one last piece of truth to reveal. And another thing, the results you've been bragging about all this time. We discovered through interviews with everyone here that you were blackmailing other employees to steal their achievements. What? You all ratted me out. James, who had been hanging his head, suddenly jumped to his feet. As he looked around, he saw his colleagues, who had joined the company with him, glaring at him with fierce expressions. This all stems from the fact that, having only worked as a host, you lacked the skills to do your job, yet you wanted an easy path to becoming an elite. It's truly a disgraceful story. With that, I finished revealing all the truths I had uncovered about James. The final trump card had clearly struck a fatal blow, leaving James without a single word in his defense. As he slumped down again, the facade of the elite new employee had completely shattered, revealing him for the worthless troublemaker he truly was. This was more than enough to end things, and while I was hesitant to kick someone when they're down, someone like James needed to be thoroughly taught a lesson, for the sake of others like Tom who had suffered because of him. This had to be done completely. I've reported all your fraudulent activities, including your fake credentials and the abuse of company resources, to the president. Your aunt, the HR director, is probably being reprimanded by the president as we speak. And soon you'll be summoned by the president as well. You, your aunt, and those 2 HR staff members will face a disciplinary hearing and receive the appropriate punishment. You'd better prepare yourself. Hearing the final words of doom, James's face twisted in despair. But suddenly, as if from some wellspring of energy, he snapped. Damn it! With his face red with rage, James screamed and bolted from the room. Don't let him get away! Stop him! Tom shouted as he took off after James, and the rest of the team followed suit, chasing after him. I joined in as well, and before I knew it, we were engaged in a full-on chase through the office, like something straight out of a police documentary. However, the chase didn't last long. James was quickly caught as he tried to make a break for the first-floor elevator. Gotcha. Give it up and face the disciplinary hearing. Damn it. Let go. Let go of me. I'm not going down like this. I'm going to keep living my life as a winner. Even as Tom and a few strong employees restrained him, James continued to shout and struggle, refusing to accept his fate. But his pitiful resistance didn't last long. James was forcibly escorted to the conference room, where the hearing was held. There he, along with his aunt and the HR accomplices, faced harsh reprimands and were dealt their punishment. Later, more details about James's past came to light. After successfully sending James and his aunt to the disciplinary hearing, I joined Tom at a bar in the city for a small celebratory drink. That's when I shared what I had learned. It turns out James started working as a host because he got into some serious trouble in his teens. Apparently, he was even involved with married women. What? Are you telling me that the cheating he's been doing recently started when he was underage? That's insane. Yes, it seems so. He was caught cheating as a minor, and his parents had to cover the settlement costs. After that, they kicked him out, and he ended up living with his doting aunt. Tom looked at me with a face full of disbelief. James had been quite the playboy since high school, involved with many women. By the time he graduated, he had gotten involved with a married woman, which led to a scandal requiring a hefty settlement. To pay off the settlement, he worked at a host club. But once the debt was settled, his parents disowned him, unable to handle his behavior any longer. However, instead of being shaken, James was actually relieved to be away from his overbearing parents, and he eagerly cozied up to his aunt, saying he wanted an easy job with a stable income. James's descent into a life of indulgence likely started because of his aunt's constant coddling and overbearing interference from a young age. Although his parents tried to protect him from his aunt's influence, their efforts were in vain, and James ended up becoming exactly the kind of reckless person they feared. You know, they say kids can't choose their parents. Well, I don't feel sorry for James. In a way, he's also a victim. That's true. And as parents ourselves, we have to make sure we raise our kids with the right guidance. That's our duty as parents. Exactly. We won't be like them. Our kids have their own lives to lead. Until the day comes when we're no longer here, we have to do everything we can as the heads of our families. As Tom raised his glass with those words, I clinked mine against his with a resounding cheers. That night, reflecting on the incident with James, Tom, and I, as fellow middle-aged dads, reaffirmed our responsibilities as adults through our shared toast. The next day, James was officially dismissed for his numerous acts of misconduct, including the most recent incident, as well as his poor work ethic and lack of competence. James's aunt also faced severe punishment, including hefty financial penalties for her role in enabling his behavior and disrupting the company's order. This is all your fault, you old hag. You didn't protect me like you should have. It's all on you. This happened because you got cocky and pushed things too far. You idiot. Ungrateful, useless brat. What did you say? This is all because you spoiled me rotten. Don't you dare pin this all on me. Right after they received their punishments, James and his aunt turned on each other, hurling insults like strangers before being escorted out by security guards chosen by the president. The two female employees who were complicit with James and his aunt were also found guilty and faced severe punishments, including significant pay cuts and transfers to remote locations. However, unable to endure the harsh environment and scrutiny, they eventually resigned and disappeared together. Afterward, it was discovered that the two women James had been cheating with were both married. As a result, their husbands sued James for damages, panicked by the hefty settlement demands, which far exceeded what he had paid off in the past as a host. James, in desperation, returned to his estranged parents' home, begging for help. But his parents refused to take him back, telling him to start over and learn life's lessons on your own, and turned him away at the door. With no support from his aunt, either after their fallout, James found himself penniless and without allies. He was last seen boarding a train to the countryside and has been missing since. As for James's aunt, Tom mentioned spotting her once in the city. She looked significantly worse for wear, with disheveled white hair and wearing a stretched-out sweatshirt, stumbling along the street. After the company dealt with James and his aunt, who had caused so much trouble, the atmosphere of peace and vitality returned. I'd recognized as the key player in their downfall, gained respect and trust from my colleagues, including Tom and even the higher-ups. But I've taken James's story as a cautionary tale. I'm determined never to let success go to my head and to remain humble, aiming to be a good role model for my daughters and a contributor to society until the end.